What is Magizoology? Simply put, Magizoology is the study of animal life possessing one or more magical properties. Though wizards have been observing, studying, and recording their experiences with magical beasts for millennia, Magizoology didn't come into its own as a formal discipline until the French natural philosopher Cuvier devised a system of differentiating magical creatures from non-magical creatures in 1717. Before Cuvier, there was no formal, surefire way to determine if a given animal was magical or not. It was once believed that any creature possessing a unique ability or feature, such as the fire-breathing of dragons, was magical. This led to a lot of confusion, where many non-magical animals, such as spiders, octopus, and electric eels, were considered magical at one time or another because of their abilities. Likewise, creatures such as krups, gnarls, and flobberworms ended up not being recognized as properly magical. Cuvier was the first to devise a criteria with which a creature must meet in order to be considered magical. According to his treatise on the inherent magical nature of certain beasts, if we are to assume that any living creature is of magical nature or in the possession of magical attributes unto one or more of its organs, then we would assume reaction in potions. Consider the cure for boils, a potion so simple as to be brewed by a child. Without the addition of horned slugs, it is nothing but a broth of porcupine quills and snake fangs, foul-smelling but inert. But once the slugs have been added, then the magical reaction will take place, and one may excuse themselves of any blemishes. Cuvier on the inherent magical nature of certain beasts, 1717. In other words, the substances produced by magical creatures, blood, bones, mucus, venom, etc., react with non-magical substances when brewed in potions. With this in mind, Cuvier developed a special potion whose sole purpose is to reveal the magical nature of added ingredients. It is known as the Zoverum potion, though it is sometimes called the Cuvier Brew among magizoologists. The recipe and ingredients are listed below. Ingredients: 2 gallons of water, 3 snail shells, 5 strands of cat hair, 2 drops of brandy, any amount of the substance being tested. Recipe: pour water into a standard size pewter cauldron. Heat to boiling temperature. Crush the snail shells into pieces and add them to the water. Add the cat hairs 1 strand at a time. Add 2 drops of brandy. Wait 12 minutes. Add the substance being tested. If the substance is truly magical, then the ingredients will react magically to create a bright violet color that will smell distinctly of fudge brownies. Note: while the potion is safe to consume, it will taste much bitterer than it sounds. If not, then the ingredients will simply sit in the brew and not react at all. Cuvier's method proved nothing short of revolutionary, and is still in use today, though it isn't used often since the discovery of new magical creatures is rare. Nonetheless, it laid the foundation for determining which creatures would be of unique concern to magizoologists. With the foundations for magizoology laid, many academics across Europe and Britain put their minds to trying to classify magical animals. Many classification systems were proposed. Some of them were based on ancient traditions founded in alchemy, classifying animals based on elemental alignment, while others tried novel bases such as geographic location or size. Cuvier himself struggled with the task, as revealed by his personal correspondence. However, one thing that all of these early attempts have in common is that all of them maintained that magical creatures were inherently dissimilar from non-magical ones, and so should be classified separately from them. This has been the predominant belief among wizards, both intellectual and otherwise, for thousands of years. However, Cuvier believed that this was misguided, and that one couldn't understand magical creatures without understanding non-magical ones as well. He struggled to devise a classification system until 1735, when Muggle naturalist Carlos Linnaeus published what was called the Linnaean or ranked system of classification. Unlike his contemporaries, Cuvier followed the publications of Muggle naturalists avidly, often lamenting in his personal letters how frustrated he was that he couldn't engage in their discussions. Linnaeus used shared physical traits as the basis for his system. Under Linnaeus's system, animals were grouped in ranked categories, where higher ranks were more inclusive and lower ranks were more exclusive. Linnaeus also assigned each of these ranks a name derived from ancient Greek or Latin in an attempt to create a universal language that researchers from all over the world would be able to understand. See the entry below for an example of how this system breaks down for the common house cat. Rank 1. Kingdom. Animalia. Animals. Rank 2. Phylum. Chordata. Animals with a nerve cord. Rank 3. Class. Mammalia. Mammals, warm-blooded animals with hair or fur. Rank 4. Order. Felidae. Felines. Rank 5. Family. Felinae. Small felines. Rank 6. Genus. Felis. Rank 6. Species. Catus. As mentioned before, the ranks become more exclusive the further down you go. There are other species in the genus Felis, such as Felis sylvestris, the wildcat. Likewise, the further down you go, the more similar the members of each group are to each other. Members of a kingdom may look very different from one another, while members of a species will look extremely similar. Linnaeus used these similarities, these shared physical traits, such as hair and warm-bloodedness in mammals, as the basis for how he grouped different creatures. Cuvier recognized instantly that magical creatures could easily fit into this classification scheme, as they shared the features which Linnaeus used as the basis of his classification. For example, Linnaeus classified snakes as reptiles with no legs, forked tongues, and specialized bones in the skull. These features are also shared by ashwinders, basilisks, and rune spores, and so could also be safely grouped as snakes, along with non-magical snakes such as cobras, vipers, and pythons. Though Cuvier's method for determining the magical nature of a beast was lauded by his colleagues, the idea that wizards should adopt a system of classification created by a muggle was derided by the entire wizarding community of Europe. Stubborn man that he was, Cuvier never recanted and maintained that the muggle-developed classification system was superior to other wizard-created alternatives. His refusal to change his mind eventually cost him much of the respect and admiration he had earlier earned in his tenure. This eventually reached a point where he was no longer invited to speak at the Academic Society of European Wizards. Later in life, Cuvier would give lectures at the Beauxbatons Academy of Magic. There, he developed a following among the students, who were inspired by his ideas. This younger generation of French wizards and witches carried his ideas into the future, where their efficacy soon became apparent. By 1800, the Linnaean system was the official standard for classifying magical beasts. This in turn generated a much larger shift among magizoologists. Since Cuvier, magizoologists have been eager to learn from and adopt the findings of Muggle zoologists. This shift in attitudes would prove to be not only wise, but essential for the growth of the field. In 1859, a British Muggle by the name of Charles Darwin put forth a remarkable new idea concerning the origins of life on this planet. Until then, everyone, wizard and muggle alike, believed that living things were created as they are now, as fixed, unchanging entities by their creator God. However, this notion was being challenged during the earlier part of the 19th century by muggle naturalists who were starting to observe that this was not the case. That the Earth was seemingly far older than biblical accounts, and that there were at least some animals that existed only in the past, having become extinct before they could be observed and recorded by modern humans. These ideas, along with detailed observations of living things from around the world, led Darwin to deduce that living creatures actually change over immense lengths of time, spanning millions of years. The fossil animals being uncovered and described across Britain and Europe were earlier forms of life that had become extinct, outcompeted by animals better able to survive and reproduce. This was a most heretical view at the time, and even other muggles were skeptical of Darwin, not least of which because it contradicted the teachings of the Church. However, Darwin's case was solid, and new evidence discovered after his publication only strengthened it, and by the late 19th century, Darwin's theory, called the theory of evolution, had become the new scientific consensus. The wizarding community at large has been slow to adopt a wholly naturalistic view of the history of life. Wizards, having the power to create new forms of life ourselves, sometimes find it hard to fathom the slower and subtler ways in which natural selection operates, not to mention our inability to comprehend the vast spans of time over which it works. The fact that this idea was first proposed by a muggle did not help matters. Even today, 79% of wizarding households in Britain believe that the history of life has been shaped primarily by supernatural forces, with 46% of that group favouring a strictly biblical account. However, while the wizarding community at large has had its apprehensions regarding the theory of evolution, Magizoologists, following the legacy of Cuvier, were much quicker to take to it. It has since then become the very foundation of our entire understanding of not only magical creatures, but of the entire history of all living things on this planet, magical or otherwise. Moving into the 20th century, as the last blank spaces on the map were beginning to be filled in, Magizoology began to take a broader, more global view of magical animals. The field had been largely centered in Europe, and so the focus of most of the magizoological literature was focused on the findings of European wizards, mostly studying European beasts. This meant that work being done by wizards and witches outside of Europe, centered on a plethora of strange and extraordinary creatures, was largely ignored. This began to change when Magizoologist Newton Scamander, having recently graduated from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, embarked on a worldwide expedition. Scamander travelled to many different locations, including Borneo, Australia, Japan, Tanzania, France, and the US. During his travels, Scamander made detailed observations of magical beasts from all over the planet, recording them in his notes. These notes would serve as the foundation for Scamander's seminal work, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Fantastic Beasts was the first ever major publication regarding magizoology released for a popular audience. Published in Britain in 1927, it introduced many readers, both professional and amateur, to creatures such as the rumpant, the clabbit, and the nundu. Scamander's text finely balanced detailed information with laconic prose, so that even newcomers to the field would understand and be interested in what Scamander had observed during his travels. It has since proven to be an invaluable resource, and is still in use today at Hogwarts, Scamander's alma mater. Revisions have been made as more information has been revealed, and the book is currently in its 54th edition. However, despite Scamander's comprehensive coverage of magical creatures the world over, he was severely limited by his publishers and editors regarding the text of the book. As a learned magizoologist with a passion for all creatures, Scamander first included detailed information about the relationship between magizoology and non-magical zoology, with mentions of Linnaeus and his system of classification, as well as Darwin's theory of evolution. The publishers worried that the emphasis on Muggle contribution would drive away potential readers, and so pressured Scamander to remove any references to Muggle influence on the history of magizoological research. He was still allowed to keep mentions of Muggle misunderstandings about magical creatures, though. The result of this was that, while more generally educated on magical creatures, most of the general wizarding public still believed in a distinct, inherent difference in the natures of magical and non-magical creatures, and that only magical creatures were of concern to the magical community. Meanwhile, magizoologists would continue to push the field further and further, gathering more information, discovering new beasts, and keeping an eye on the parallel studies of Muggles for any useful bits of information. The next major discovery came in 1953, when Muggle scientists Rosalind Franklin and Raymond Gosling produced an image of the DNA molecule. For further reading on DNA, molecules, and other basics of the purely natural sciences, see Fundamentals of Science for Wizarding Know-Nothings by Salamandra Marigold, showing that its bases were paired. 4 years later, Muggles James Watson and Francis Crick developed the case for the process by which DNA replicates itself, providing the recipe for all life on Earth. The discovery of the shape of DNA and the relation of its shape to its function are some of the most important discoveries in all of Muggle science. They provide the basis for understanding how the theory of evolution can work. However, among many profound implications, 3 stand out in the context of magizoology. 1. All life is made of DNA. 2. Understanding of DNA provides the basis for understanding heredity. 3. The more DNA 2 life forms share, the more closely related they are to each other. If magical life is inherently distinct from non-magical life, then this should be reflected in their DNA, if indeed magical creatures are even made of DNA. The first genetic testing done on magical creatures, a Krupp and a Kneazle, were performed in 1960 by Andreas Strenger. Krupps are classified in the Muggle-devised Linnaean system of classification as a breed of dog, while Kneazles are a species of cat. If magical life is inherently distinct from non-magical life, then the Krupp and Kneazle should be more closely related to each other than either should be to dogs or cats. However, the test results showed that Krupps share more of their DNA with dogs than with Kneazles, and likewise for Kneazles with cats. The idea that magical and non-magical life were fundamentally different was now untenable. The two are linked inextricably to each other, and the relationships between them are vast, complex, and subtle. Figuring out these relationships has been one of the key goals of magizoology in the latter part of the 20th century. No longer merely concerned with appearance or habitat, modern magizoology seeks a deeper understanding of magical beasts, their origins, and their relationship to each other, and to the world as a whole. During the 1960s, Muggles were beginning to question the old Linnaean system of classification. It had been conceived of before the revelation that living things change over time, and so had trouble accounting for earlier, prehistoric forms of life that seemed to combine traits from older and younger lineages, i.e., birds that had long tails, toothed jaws, and clawed hands like reptiles. As such, a new classification system was proposed by a number of scientists called cladistics. In cladistics, living things are grouped not on the basis of shared traits, but of shared ancestry. These groups are called clades and consist of all the descendants of a single common ancestor. For example, under the old system, birds and reptiles were 2 different classes of vertebrates. However, things become confusing when you start looking at fossils. Birds evolved from reptiles in a slow, gradual, and modular process. It is impossible to point at any one moment in the history of the bird lineage and declare, "This is no longer a reptile, this is a bird." It would be akin to looking at a color gradation, blue on one side, red on the other, and pointing to any single spot and deciding when blue had officially changed to red. Cladistics accounts for this by saying that birds are a clade of reptiles. In cladistics, it doesn't matter how morphologically distinct one lineage becomes from its cousins. It is still included in the clade. This is a radically different way of thinking from the previous model, which is why even today, Magizoologists are slow to adopt a wholly cladistic view of taxonomy and still employ the ranks for convenience. But make no mistake, the shift is happening, especially among Magipaleontologists whose focus is on the very animals that ranked taxonomy fails to account for. Regardless of which classification system any given Magizoologist prefers to use, cladistics is part of a larger change in thinking called phylogenetics, the study of the evolutionary relationships between different living things. Phylogenetics is becoming an increasingly important part of the magizoological scene as it provides a greater understanding of where all magical creatures come from, how they are all related to each other, and why life on Earth looks the way that it does. And finally, the last great and important shift in magizoological thinking has been an increased emphasis on broader ecological thinking. Creatures are not isolated entities that exist in a vacuum. They are parts of a larger ecological whole, a complex system of different creatures that are simultaneously so different from one another, yet also dependent on each other for survival in nuanced and subtle ways. This is also combined with an increasing awareness of how human beings affect the various ecosystems of the world, and the subsequent effects that these have on living things. We are starting to learn the importance of understanding how ecosystems work if we are to maintain them, not only for practical purposes, but so that future generations may grow up to appreciate them as we have. Every Magizoologist ever born has an incredible passion for all forms of life. They understand that life is as beautiful as it is precious, and that understanding only increases the more we learn about the inconceivable variety of living things on this planet. Humankind, wizards and muggle alike, will protect and cherish only that which it loves. And by sharing their love for animals with everyone, Magizoologists hope that future generations will strive to care for this wonderful world which we call home.